From immigration to abortion, a look at some of the biggest issues in America. Welcome to the special Faith Nation in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, Culberson County sits along the easternmost section of Texas near the Panhandle, known as a hub for human trafficking and drug smuggling. CBN's Heather Sells took a ride along with a sheriff who enforces crime control there to see firsthand the extent of the crisis at the southern border.
Culberson County is one of the Lone Star State's largest, 3 times the size of Rhode Island, and with just several thousand residents. Sheriff Oscar Carrillo says he knows why the cartels have begun to exploit it.
It's all about geography.
It means Culberson's border proximity and interstate highway makes the county a destination route for both human and drug smuggling.
We got Mexico on the south end of the county. We have New Mexico on the north end of the county. We got major corridors coming through here.
This is very treacherous terrain. You've got to watch your step out here. It's hot, there's wild animals, and it's remote, which is why it's become so popular with the cartels.
They have no clue where they're at. They have no GPS.
CBN News rode with Sheriff Carrillo to find out what makes the journey so dangerous. The migrants, often young men who've paid smugglers thousands, are typically dropped at the Rio Grande River. They are told to walk what could be days to a designated pickup spot along a highway.
It just sounds like it's so organized. They've got a plan.
To bolster their confidence before they attempt to navigate the desert, the smugglers give the migrants backpacks filled with water and cheap camouflage clothes. Still, hundreds are dying near the border each year. In 2021, the sheriff recovered 30 bodies, up from the normal 1 or 2. The main culprits, heat and dehydration. The day we joined him, a call came for another.
We're going to put it in the back of my truck.
This one, some 20 miles from Van Horn, the county seat.
They have just recovered this body. It was likely out here for several days. It's so far been identified as a male who was born in 1994, and he does have some identification. So the hope is that they will be able to easily connect with family.
He's got a crucifix.
State law obligates the sheriff to investigate all deaths. That means examining the body and personal effects.
It's a prayer.
Later, on the edge of a road, Carrillo and his deputy transfer the body to an ambulance to begin the autopsy and notification of family in Guatemala.
It's really also an index of desperation.
El Paso-based analyst Dylan Corbett sees various reasons these migrants attempt to make it to the U.S. Worldwide, migration is up dramatically, thanks in part to the COVID pandemic. Economics and danger at home also push migrants.
It's not simply that people are coming seeking a better life. It's also that people, in many cases, are seeking just a bare life, just bare existence.
And Corbett says the broken U.S. asylum system is often driving migrants straight to the cartels.
If people need to cross, they'll work with less than savory folks to make it happen. And that involves criminals, that involves human smugglers. And sometimes those folks are also connected to cartels.
This is an example of what we're seeing on a traffic stop.
Sheriff Carrillo sees the smuggling throughout his county, people crammed into vehicles or waiting on a highway for a pickup that often doesn't come. Their debris, water bottles, clothing, and backpacks can be found along the road and off in the scrub. He is also beginning to see them in town.
When they get to this area, they're out of water, they're out of money. Sometimes their plan has fallen apart.
Carrillo's not alone. Border Patrol has installed rescue beacons and 911 signs, hoping to provide medical help before it's too late. Still, with numbers climbing in Culberson, both for deaths and apprehensions, and questions around Title 42, Carrillo is not optimistic.
We see the writing on the wall. We're experiencing it now, and we're anticipating a big increase.
That could also mean a very busy summer for the sheriff, his deputies, and all law enforcement here. Reporting in Culberson County, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Such a difficult but important story to tell. Thank you, Heather. Well, teachers, parents, and students caught in the nation's culture war producing alternatives to the public school system. When Faith Nation returns. And welcome back. Parents across the country are growing concerned about what their kids are being taught in public schools, and the D.C. suburb of Loudoun County in Northern Virginia is considered ground zero for the outrage over everything from bathroom sexual assaults to questionable books considered required reading. In response, a local pastor is spearheading a multi-million-dollar project to offer a faith-based alternative. Tara Mergener explains.
Nestled in the rolling hills of Northern Virginia sits a sprawling tree-lined campus. Classrooms inside this shuttered private school empty. Once busy halls are eerily silent, each room like a time capsule of better days. But not for long.
After much prayer and discussion with our elders and pastoral leadership, we will be launching Cornerstone Christian Academy.
With a campus about 20 miles from Cornerstone Chapel, the church will open the school in fall of 23.
But just kind of abandoned.
Yeah, I know.
Initially, there will be enough space for 500 elementary and middle school students.
Yeah, they have classrooms, desks, there's the gymnasium, there's a cafeteria down the hall. We're going to repurpose it for the Lord.
There are also plans to expand to high school and online learning.
Our goal is to provide children an education where they have a biblical worldview so that then they can go out into the real world and be salt and light.
The multi-million-dollar project is Pastor Gary Hamrick's response to what's playing out in public school systems across the country.
In our schools, kids are reading this, and you're going to tell me I can't read it to you?
The woman in the yellow trying to break up the fight.
3 students killed, 8 others shot.
I pledge allegiance to the queers.
Any religious tradition ascribes as God's will is no concern of this Congress.
You shut down a club for first graders studying the Bible. Do you feel good about that?
Yes, we do.
Loudoun is considered the face of the nation's culture war. For more than a year, parents railing against everything from sexual assault on campus.
Organizers say the walkout was to show solidarity to victims of sexual violence.
To critical race theory, X-rated books in school libraries.
They're perverted because there is no other rational or reasonable explanation.
And transgender policies.
It's abuse to a child, and it's sinning against our God.
Tanner Cross's dismissal for refusing to call students by preferred pronouns became the last straw for Hamrick.
Our kids need an alternative. We have to ourselves, as a church, get engaged. What can we do to help give a Christian-based, Christian biblical worldview education for our children?
Abby Platt, who saw 3 children suspended for not wearing masks at school, even though the state mandate was lifted, applied immediately.
LCPS has lost our trust, and we really want our children to be in an environment that is safe, where they will focus on literacy and learning instead of indoctrination.
Loudoun County schools have been the subject of so much controversy. Pastor Gary knew there'd be interest locally. What he didn't expect was to hear from parents in 27 states eager to enroll their children.
Cornerstone has been inundated with inquiries, and not just from parents. Teachers want out of public schools, too.
By the end of the week, we had over 2,500 students pre-registered. I got over 450 emails from teachers wanting employment.
The overwhelming response mirrors what appears to be a national trend. Nearly 2 million students left public schools between 2020 and 2021, with large numbers now enrolled in Christian education. Before the pandemic, many Christian schools struggled with low enrollment. Now there are waiting lists.
One of the things that came out of COVID was parents were looking over the shoulder of their kids as they were taking online classes and realizing some of this stuff that's being taught is against their own values, even if they weren't Christians.
E. Ray Moore, founder of the Conservative Christian Education Initiative, calls it a once-in-a-100-year moment.
It awakened in people, many Christians in churches and some pastors, the desire and the recognition that it's our responsibility to provide the Christian education of our children, not the government.
The Association of Christian Schools International, one of the country's largest networks, has seen double-digit growth since the pandemic hit. The Association of Classical Christian Schools has added some 10,000 students. The number of homeschoolers has doubled, and new Christian schools are popping up all over the country.
We're seeing a resurgence in homeschool co-ops and hybrid homeschools and learning pods, and both churches and communities and even cul-de-sacs of people that are becoming very creative in what is good quality Christian value-based education.
With many public schools mired in controversy, interest in Christian education is expected to keep rising.
Do you think that this is part of a revival or part of an awakening of people because things have gotten so contentious?
Yeah, it's definitely part of a revival that I hope sweeps across this nation in different ways, not just in terms of schools and education, but what is happening in our churches. The sleeping giant has been awakened, and parents begin to realize when their kids' future is at stake, we need to get involved.
Like many church leaders, Hamrick believes Christian schooling is no longer a nicety, but a necessity. In Middleburg, Virginia, Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Thank you, Tara. Coming up, as the fight over abortion divides America, a look at some of the biggest myths about the issue.
I am Region's first ROTC graduate student.
Welcome back. Are you pro-choice or pro-life? The question has been a dividing line in America for decades, but some pro-life advocates say that division comes in part because people buy into what they call abortion's myths, like when life actually begins and the long-term emotional effects abortions can have on women. Paul Strand reports.
One of the toughest battles for people against abortion is addressing assertions around the issue that make taking a life more acceptable. Like, for instance, that a life doesn't really begin till a baby's outside the womb.
This idea that before the baby's born, nothing's really happening, it's basically a nothing, and then all of a sudden, poof, at birth, we have a baby.
In her book, The Choice, Danielle D'Souza Gill takes on what she calls myths accepted as fact. She points to the actual fact there's much more than nothing the first few weeks, writing, in the first trimester alone, the baby's toes, fingernails, bendable elbows, nose, head, hormones, and heartbeat develop. There's a myth women aren't wounded by abortion. Michelle Shelfer takes that on in her book, Prepare a Room.
The blow to a woman's identity that occurs with abortion can be likened to a racehorse that loses a leg, an athlete who suffers a disabling injury, or an artist who goes blind, except that we did it to ourselves.
Brandy Swindell opened a pro-life pregnancy center next to a Planned Parenthood clinic.
All the studies show and all the stories show from heartfelt women that they have been deeply wounded by abortion violence. Abortion is a violent act on a woman's body, and of course we know it takes the life of that innocent child.
We suffer not only the loss of our child, but the loss of ourselves as mothers.
Some pro-choice types assert fathers-to-be, and really all men, should be taken out of the equation altogether.
They want to make it really just between the woman and the abortionist.
Author Steve Carlin of 40 Days for Life says no.
Every child that I've ever met has both a mother and a father, and half of the victims of abortion in terms of the babies are male babies. And so I think it's disingenuous for those in the culture that try to claim that this is a women's issue only.
Shelfer argues against the myth a man isn't wounded by abortion.
He suffers a blow to his identity as a protector, as a father. Those instinctive and bred in the bone identity issues are really assaulted when he steps back and allows his little one to be harmed.
69% of men want abortion legal, and 43% call themselves pro-choice. But Gill says there's another side.
There are many other men who, find it very heartbreaking, and I think for them, it often ends up being kind of like PTSD, where they live with that for the rest of their lives, knowing that they couldn't do anything to stop the death of the child.
Gil writes about one of those named Carl. Even though he ended up paying for the abortion, it had a traumatic effect on him. I didn't know how I was going to survive. I wasn't going to jump off a bridge, but I probably would have drunk myself to death. I've thought about what happened every day for the last 32 years. Shelfer, in her book, quotes Jim telling of numerous nightmares he's had about an abandoned woman and her daughter years after his girlfriend's abortion. Writing, I wake up from this recurring dream with feelings of shame and guilt. Sometimes I see the little girl from a distance and long to hold her. But I know that is not possible. She is hauntingly beautiful. Another myth is the unborn may be human, but they aren't persons with the rights all people naturally have.
And this goes down to really their very existence and their very ability to live or die.
In her book, she writes,
this is the justification the Nazis used, claiming that Jews are humans but not persons. This is the justification used for slavery, claiming that blacks are humans but not persons.
These authors all agree. If and when the falsehoods and myths are ripped away, society must then cope with the devastating truth that abortion takes the life of a person just as real as you are or I am. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
A safe haven for runaway slaves. We'll take you to the unlikely spot where thousands found refuge in their quest for freedom when Faith Nation returns.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
And finally tonight, snakes, insects, flies, and thick cover. The Great Dismal Swamp is a thriving refuge for wildlife. But generations ago, it served as another type of sanctuary, a place of refuge for people desperate to escape the bondage of slavery. CBN's Charlene Aaron brings us the story.
The Great Dismal Swamp once covered nearly 1 million acres between northeastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia. Between 1620 and around the time of the Civil War, it served as a thriving refuge for runaway slaves who chose to build their lives here in freedom, no matter the conditions.
You have venomous snakes biting insects and flies, thick cover of greenbriers. A great place as a refuge for wildlife, not as much probably a great place refuge for people.
As many as 50,000 runaway slaves, called maroons, an indigenous term, settled here on small rises of land known as Mesic Islands. Chris Lowy manages the swamp's National Wildlife Refuge in Suffolk, Virginia.
The amazing part about the escaped slaves living here in the swamp is that the conditions living in here were better for them than being enslaved. And that is, that is a difficult concept to understand today.
They established hidden communities in these heavily treed wetlands, building cabins and possibly farming small plots of land. Researchers believe the former slaves fed their families by hunting deer, wild turkey, and other game, skills they may have learned from Native Americans who also sought shelter here. The runaways went to great lengths to keep their settlements secret due to fear of being captured by slave owners. Dr. Dan Sayers, an archaeologist at American University, has studied the Maroon Islands for more than 10 years.
What I'm finding out there in the middle of the swamp is these big old cabin footprints and a fire pit and all this stuff that shows, that this is a really active landscape. And most, not to say all, most of the material culture or artifacts is stone. And it's in equally abundant is burnt sand and clay.
Sayers realized he was on to a significant discovery.
It'd be little pieces of clear glass. It'd be a couple white clay tobacco pipe fragments, some iron or metals fragments or little pieces. A smattering of nails, some lead shot, a couple gun flint chips. There's enough stuff artifacts. I was able to definitely feel and definitely know that this was of historic period.
As a direct descendant of a slave who helped to build the Great Dismal Swamp, Eric Shepard shares a personal connection to this history.
The story of the enslaved people that escaped the plantations and went and lived in the swamp was really, I guess, first introduced to me in the slave narrative of my ancestor Moses Grandy, where he was employed as a boatsman or waterman.
Grandy traveled the swamp's canal and learned to navigate boats as logging operations and trade expanded at the site. He and other slaves dug the canal and several ditches by hand.
As the swamp is today, yes, slave labor, those people have a permanent mark on the swamp as it is today.
After arranging to buy his freedom, Grandy dictated his story, sharing about life as a slave and working in the swamp, never mentioning his interactions with escaped slaves living deep in the swamp.
He had to still be mindful of when he shared his story, that you had to protect the people. It was a certain amount of secrecy.
While many made the swamp their home, others saw it as just a stop on their journey north as part of the Underground Railroad.
Dismal Swamp was a refuge. It was a haven for the Underground Railroad activity. But can you imagine down in Louisiana, if you get to the Dismal Swamp, you're almost home free.
In 2004, the refuge was designated an important landmark on the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. Freedom Maroons in the swamp preferred to living in captivity.
On the one hand, it tells us just how horrible slavery was, right? And really, let's not forget the racism and the white supremacy part of that.
When slavery ended in 1863, residents were free to leave the shadows of the swamp, moving to surrounding communities, a time Shepard compares to the biblical account of Israel's deliverance from bondage.
How did God deliver them out? Who can't explain it? There's only one explanation. The same God yesterday, today, and forever.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
And a good word to end the show with. Thank you so much for watching this special edition of Faith Nation. We hope you have a great night.